welcome to part 72 in my build log series of the Trumpeter 1:200 scale model of the Titanic. Today is a relatively quick video. I'm not doing a huge amount, but I have fixed the bow anchor crane in place, and I've also added the aft anchor right at the very stern of the ship, and I've also completed the cranes on the poop deck. So a few fairly fiddly little jobs, but well worthwhile doing. So without any further ado, let's crack on. Right, just about to do the anchor crane, and this is another China 3D part, and it's very nice. But it does rather expose one of the silent curios about the China 3D stuff again, which is that there's no instructions for these, or at least none that I'm aware of. And that does make things a bit challenging because, you know, in this set you get the anchor crane, but you don't get the bars that go across and support the jib of the crane, and there's no guidance. There's nothing saying use the stuff that comes in the Trumpeter kit. There's nothing saying make your own. You know, it's just not very clear. Anyway, happily, these ones that come in the KA set actually fit pretty nicely. And I mean, you know, in an ideal world, you'd expect them to fit nicely because the crane's 1:200 scale, and you know, it should all be pretty accurate, but you never really know for sure. And of course, in something like this jib, where it really does need to mate up against both surfaces perfectly, even 0.5 millimeter would actually be pretty unforgiving. But this does seem to fit quite nicely. So my intention for fitting this is just to daub a little bit of glue onto each side of the upstand of the crane, and then hopefully do the same on there and see how it works. You could say I'm improvising, and indeed I probably am, but there we go, we'll see how it works. Glue and the magic glue spreader. Daub, 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 daub. And right, see if that holds. No, unfortunately, I was under the impression I had another video of me finishing off the gluing of the anchor crane, but seemingly I don't. Needless to say, I did manage to connect both of the upright pieces successfully. Right. Just doing the crane bases. And these actually slot together like a dream. Now, I've just put a freeze frame here to explain what I'm doing. When these two cranes are stowed, they actually overlap each other. And so one of the jibs needs to have a slight angle to it so that it can sit on top of the other jib. This is something I neglected to do on the anchor cranes on the forward well deck, and what you end up having to do is you have to end up slanting the entire assembly, which doesn't look as good or as realistic as just raising the jib slightly. So that's what I'm doing here. So here we have the rear anchor, anchor crane, and two cargo cranes. And as you can see, I've painted them black first, and I'll now go over these in white. So here we go, one coat of white, and as you can see, that sort of black underlay really does help with the sort of shadow effects on these parts. Really does make the detail pop a bit more. Now clearly this does need more white, that is too grey for me now, but you can sort of just, you can just see why the black underneath does help, because of course the white paint will struggle to get to the secluded areas, and those will be the areas that have the shadows in. So it really is a nice technique, and it's not deliberate by any means, but it's a happy coincidence of the process. Other thing that I did, because I was an idiot, I painted the anchor black, and then I forgot to take it off the gluing section before I did some white, so that's now grey, so I need to repaint that black. So that's just me being an idiot. Anyway, moving on. Right, I'm just doing one of the cranes, and I won't labour the point on this because I have shown this multiple times before, but as always, I am doing these sort of, I don't know what you call them, guy rope stanchions, things that hold the jib of the crane in place, and I've blue tacked at one end just to hold it in place. Now what I'll do is I'll add a bit of glue, give it a little squirt of kicker. And by kicker, by the way, what I mean is this stuff, and it's just a chemical that you spray on which makes the glue set nice and fast. What I'll do then, I'll turn over now and do the other side. This side's a little bit trickier because the walkway of the crane doesn't make it sit as well. So what I'll do is I'll just put a bit of blue tack on it just to hold it in place. And here's the other stanchion. So pick it up with the blue tack, place it down roughly, and then I can manipulate it further with some tweezers. Now, I've been thinking for a long time about whether I want the stanchions to be absolutely identical on either side of the crane. And I've decided that in the end I probably don't, because for scale, this is a person next to them, so they're big cranes, and I just suspect that there probably would have been subtly different tensions on each of the cables. So I'm not overly concerned about one cable being subtly different, at a subtly different tension to the other, and therefore being slightly out of alignment with each other. Happily, of course, the other advantage of that is that it makes it a lot easier to assemble as well. Glue in place, kicker, and I'll just leave that to dry now. Here is one I made earlier. You can see that all that remains on this one now is the actual central cable that actually raises and lowers the load. So that's what I'll do next. So now doing the central cable, and I've already glued it at the top of the crane, so I'm just going to remove said blue tack. You can see, or maybe you can't, I don't know, the cameras are zoomed in as I can make it. So I'm now going to glue at the bottom, and that will complete these cranes. Didn't get it there. I find with these really fine cables, you gotta make sure the glue is actually got the thing that you want stuck down, because it's very possible for that not to happen. There we go, that's done. Indeed done. So there we have it. 2 more cranes, and indeed the 2 last cranes, ready for installation. Right, just getting ready to fit the anchor crane. That needs to go here. And here is the anchor crane, all glued up and painted. And one of the really nice things about building a model, particularly one where it's large enough that you can add people, is it really does give context to how big this ship was. And I know in comparison to modern day ships, it's not huge, but my God, nonetheless, it was still big. And things like the anchor crane, I don't know why, and obviously I know a reasonable amount about the Titanic, but I just never quite appreciated just how big it was. I mean, you know, that is a person. And the anchor crane towers over them. I mean, it's, you know, this will be about the height of 3 or 4 people standing on top of each other. Just a colossal structure. And of course, it has to be because it's lifting an anchor that is that big. Again, much bigger than a human. So it had to be a huge thing. But I don't know whether it's just, you know, photos being taken from a long way, but I never quite appreciated just how large this piece of equipment was. But anyway, I won't wax lyrical on it too much, but it is just, as I say, one of the quite interesting things about actually having a model to build, you know, especially when you can add people. It really does give you a bit of context as to how big the ship was. So, here we go. There we go. You get a bit of an odd perspective on that camera angle, but I assure you it is straight and level. There we go. There is the anchor crane in situ. And that, you know, again, adds quite a nice bit of sort of detail to the bow area. So the next thing is to get this anchor in place and then add the gratings that go along the top. So we'll do that now. Right, as you can see, I have now added this grating right at the very, very prow of the ship, and the main anchor, of course, as well. And happily enough, the bolt that sits beneath it is pretty hard to see. I've also added this really nice head of the stem piece, I suppose you could call it. This bit which has rigging moving up to the masts, and it also has this section here for ropes and such to attach. Need to do a bit of painting. You can see some filler that I've added, but I need to do some painting there anyway, so not to worry. I might add a little bit of weathering here, because it's particularly in this area, because, you know, it's an anchor and it's a trough, so it's a place where water is likely to pool. Even if it's not seawater, rainwater I'm sure would pool there, and I'm sure there will be drain holes to allow water to run freely out of it. But nonetheless, I think you would get some water build-up down there. So a little bit of distress necessary to apply, I think. But it looks really nice, actually. And of course, any James Cameron fans will recognise this as the area that Jack and Rose stand in on the film Titanic. So, there we go. Another bit of the forecastle done. So there we go, cranes in situ. Right, the last little bit I'm going to show today is the installation of these pieces. So these are the guy ropes that would hold the anchor crane in position and stop it sort of swinging around in wind or swell of the sea, that kind of thing. So these are made up of a few pieces. You've got this pulley section here, and I painted that in a steel grey. Then you've got the two sort of blocks, I suppose, the actual pulleys themselves, painted in white. Then you've got retaining cables at either end of that, back in grey. And then at one end, this will attach down to the deck, you've got a cleat. And at the other end, you've got a hook to go onto the anchor crane itself. Now, I've assembled these as a unit before fitting it to the anchor crane, because these need to look taut. There needs to be tension on these, because these will have been under tension. They will have been holding the anchor crane in place. So it won't look very good if these look saggy. So what I didn't want to do was, glue the cleats down onto the deck and then realise I've glued the cleat in the wrong place, so attaching this to it would look saggy. So what I've done instead, and this is the approach I intend to take with most of the rigging, which is made out of metal, so things like funnel guys and stuff like that as well, is I'll assemble it and paint it as a unit, and then glue it onto the ship, onto the model, as a whole piece. And what I'll do is I will start with this piece up here, which attaches to the actual anchor crane itself, and then once I've got that in place and secure, I will then fix the cleat onto the deck. Now the reason again for that is so that I can position this in a location which keeps this whole assembly taut, but also provides the right sort of angle that this assembly would have been at in relation to the deck. Now there will be some inaccuracy here because of course, we're sort of dealing with Pythagoras and we're dealing with pretty small numbers, and so there will be a margin for error, but I would much prefer this assembly to look taut and as if it's under load, and the cleat to be 2 or 3 millimeters away from where it should be, and the cleat to be in exactly the right place, but then this to be saggy. So that's the approach I'm taking. Obviously I haven't done it yet, so if I reassess this later, it didn't work, but I'm fairly confident this is the way to go. So I'll talk more clearly about what I am doing when I fix the next guy rope down. But this is the first one of these things I've done on the model, so I am sort of learning as I go here. I decided halfway through that the anchor crane wasn't quite orientated properly, so I decided to remove it and reset it. Right, that's one in, and as you probably saw, halfway through I decided the anchor crane didn't quite have the right orientation. I didn't feel like this upstand was quite right, so I took the I guess you call it the nuclear option, and removed it, and then stuck it back down again. But as you can see, hopefully you can see what I mean about wanting this to be under tension. It's got to look like that, otherwise it completely destroys the realism. It doesn't look right if it's not under tension. Because if it wasn't, the anchor crane would slosh around all over the place, cause a hell of a lot of damage, make a hell of a lot of noise, and it wouldn't be very good. So, that first one is now in place. I will try to do the second one on a video rather than a time-lapse, so you can sort of see the process and I can sort of talk about it and get annoyed as it goes wrong as we actually fit it. So, let's do that now. Now, of course, you've got a lot of different axes to think about here. You've got the cleat, of course, has to be orientated correctly that it's going to go onto the ground. Get in, son. Sorry, I stopped talking there because I was concentrating a bit. So what I've done is I put a bit of glue onto the very end, held it in place and used Kicker. And this is where Kicker really is worth its weight in gold, because it stops that sort of moment of indecision of has it glued it, has it not, has the glue set, has it not. It just takes that decision making completely out of the way. Of course, this is one of those times when having 40 or 50 hands would be useful, but sadly I do not have that many. So we've got to make do with two. Now that it's in place, I'm adding a bit more glue to the top, just to sort of really make sure that's held in place. And now comes the bit where we stick it down. And of course, at this point, you realise how important it is that when you glue the bit at the top, you've made sure the cleat at the bottom is orientated correctly, because that cleat has to sit flush on the deck. There's no point having it sort of at 45 degrees looking like it's defying gravity. Again, that completely shatters the illusion. The cleat has to be squarely down on the deck, and ideally exactly in line with this retaining strap on the other side of the ship. So it's a pretty, you're working with a lot of different triangles here, so it's not always easy. The clock's about to ding. There we go. So I'm now adding some glue to the cleat, the underside of it. And now pressing it down onto the deck. Applying kicker once more. And Bob is your uncle. And then belt and braces. Now it's partly in place. I will add a bit more glue. And when I'm adding a bit more glue, I tend not to use kicker. I use kicker when I need the glue to set quickly, but when I don't really care about how long the glue takes to dry, I tend not to use kicker. And I'd be grateful if other people could back me up on this or let me know their thoughts, but I always have the impression that CA glue seems to be stronger when it's allowed to dry of its own volition. When I seem to use kicker, it dries faster, but it feels like the joint isn't as strong. So I'm interested to know people's thoughts on that. Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, crikey, I'm glad that's done. There is the anchor crane. So there we go, anchor crane in place, and as you can see, nicely under tension. And you can see what I mean about all these different triangles at work. You know, you've got to keep the hypotenuse of that taut, and then it's got to be exactly the same spacing horizontally for each of the two guy ropes. They've got to be the same lengthways down the ship as well. It all gets a bit confusing. You're spinning a lot of plates at once, but it does look really nice once it's done. So I am really happy with that. Right, that's about it for today. I hope you have enjoyed that. If you do have any questions or comments, pop them down below and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. If you've enjoyed this, do please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.